We make no secret of it, and we say time and time again that the difference that we see between successful people and unsuccessful people is largely down to their mindset. So this week on the Property Podcast, we're looking at how do successful investors think.
Yes, welcome to the Property Podcast. This is episode 225. I am Rob D with Rob B, of course. And as well as all the normal goodies that you're going to get in any episode of the Property Podcast, we are looking at mindset today. So you can think a lot about tactics like where to buy and whether houses or flats are best. And we do. And you can talk about numbers and calculations, and we do. But all of that counts for nothing if you don't have your mindset right. So that is what we're going to get into in just a moment. But first, Rob, a couple of weeks back, we spent our Saturday with a couple of hundred people who definitely had the right mindset.
Well, yes, that's right. We had our Discovery Day, our open day. So as we've said before, Rob and I rarely talk about our businesses. In fact, when we surveyed you, 40% of you, or I think even more, didn't actually know we had them, or else we did. So we put it right by having a Discovery Day, where people came along to find out more about RMP Property and how it can help people on their investment journey, and Yellow Lettings, and how Yellow makes it easier for people to be landlords by managing their properties. So it was a great day. It was really nice to meet so many people. Of course, there was plenty of education packed in as well. We did morning sessions and afternoon sessions. So by the time I got home, I wasn't very chatty with my wife, Rob. I don't know about you, but I was a bit talked out. But it was a great day.
Very much talked out, but a whole day talking about property, you can't go too far wrong, and people seem to enjoy it, and we definitely enjoyed it. So will we do it again? Probably. Stay tuned, and at some point we will let you know when the next one is coming up.
Okay, Rob, so we think we're doing all right when it comes to our property empires, or portfolios, probably a better word. But Google really does have a property empire, and in a couple of quick purchases, they've absolutely decimated anybody else's property portfolio that I know with the size of their portfolio. Absolutely bonkers. Great article this week.
Yeah, so this is from Business Insider. The great thing about this is there's loads of photos and not many words. So you can just scroll through and look at lots of interesting photos and maps and all that sort of thing. Yeah, Google have already got a massive building in King's Cross in all the new development behind the station. I'd seen the logo, but I didn't realize they actually had this entire building that runs all the way down the side of the main square there. Turns out that's not quite enough. And they're also moving into a huge building that runs the entire length of the boulevard that runs up from King's Cross Station up to Granary Square, if you know the area, where all the food trucks and street markets are. So not content with one massive building, they are moving into an even more massive building as well, this is not instead of, which comes with a pool and a basketball court and a roof garden. It looks ridiculous.
It does. I'm ridiculously jealous. It looks absolutely amazing. This is one of those ones where you need to go and look at it. You're not going to understand it through the podcast, so we've chosen a good article there. But that means you have to go to the show notes, which this week you will find at thepropertyhub.net/think success. And that's where we'll link back to a previous podcast, Rob, because we've already done a podcast on mindset because it's so important. And that was episode 190. Again, link to it in the show notes. But there's a reason why we're coming back to this again.
Yeah, we're coming back to it because it's so important, and we're coming back from a slightly different angle. So we're not just going over the same stuff again. Last time we talked about mindset in a general sense. We talked about what you can learn from top athletes, how to be positive, the importance of self-awareness and avoiding negative influences, all that kind of thing. All really, really important. Today we're talking about specific biases that can lead you astray with your investments. So humans are prone to biases, ways of thinking that lead you down a certain path which might not be helpful. So everyone has these biases, we all do. As a result of having them, we will make decisions that are not optimal. So how do you get rid of them? Well, the first step to get rid of these biases is to be aware of them. So we're going to talk about what some of these are, give you some examples, and then give you some practical steps for how to fix them. So when you hear mindset, you might think, oh, this is going to be a bit woo-woo and it's not going to be very actionable. Well, no, it is. We're going to give you some concrete tips to emulate the thought patterns of the most successful investors.
Okay, so first up is confirmation bias. So what is confirmation bias? Well, it's where we seek confirmation to our point of view. So what we do is we surround ourselves with very similar people. Our friends and often family, not always family, but certainly our friends and acquaintances and people in our social circles tend to be people with similar interests. So people with similar points of view, not always the same, but similar. But when you know confirmation bias is kicking in, you'll start to go and seek forum posts or blog posts or news articles that back up your point of view. That's what people will do when they've got confirmation bias. So if you believe something to be true and you want it to be true, you'll go and find a way to validate it, which is really interesting. But you can see why this happens, because nowadays with social media, whereas a lot of people consume their news and get their media from, we are following things that are of interest to us and people of interest to us even more selectively than our friends. So we are constantly inundated with what we believe is news, but actually it's news tailored for you that backs up all your beliefs. This is a really big thing that I actually think not many people or investors are aware of. If you say what's confirmation bias, most people can explain it, but they don't realize, especially now with the modern internet, how much this is playing out every single day.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And confirmation bias is a natural tendency because you want to think that you're right and you want to have your opinion validated. So it's always very tempting to go looking for confirmation, and it's so easy to find it now. So what are some examples of that? So for example, thinking either houses or apartments are the best investment. If you think one for some particular reason, you can go and find lots of evidence to back up your particular view. Same goes for where to invest. Some people think that London is the only place to invest. You can go and find loads of data showing how well London has done in the past, so you can confirm that your initial bias towards London was correct. Or another really big one, the belief that property can't possibly go up any further. So, for example, there is one very big internet forum which is completely dedicated to the idea that property prices are going to collapse. That's the entire point of the forum. And everyone on there, every day, any piece of data that comes out or anything that they can find, even if it's just anecdotal, they will take this to mean that property prices are about to crash. Now, I'm not saying that they are wrong or silly, because one day they're going to be right. But of course, not every piece of data shows that. They're deliberately seeking out information to confirm what they think is true or what they want to be true, and they're spending all their time surrounding themselves with people who think the same thing. So if it turns out that they are wrong at some point, because at some point they're going to be wrong and at some point they're going to be right, but when they're wrong, they're not necessarily going to know they're wrong.
Exactly. A broken watch is right twice a day. So it's pretty apparent that having confirmation bias is going to hurt you as an investor. So you need to be aware of it, that it's happening. If you allow confirmation bias to creep in, then you may be making very poor investment decisions. You may have latched onto a belief that is a wrong belief, go and back it up and cost yourself significant sums of money in the future. So don't get passionate about a certain belief or point of view when it comes to investment. Be open to different ideas, because if you're not, it will hurt you. So if you understand it will hurt you, and it's really important to acknowledge that, what's even more important is how to fix it if you do find yourself in this place.
Yeah, and the good news is that practically it's very easy to fix. Psychologically, not so much, because of course it's much more comfortable to just have your own opinion validated. But in practical terms, it's really easy. All you need to do is to find people to challenge your beliefs and your point of view. The most successful people love being challenged and they love being proven wrong. I was listening to a podcast with Mark Andreessen, who basically invented the modern web browser and was a very early investor in Facebook. And he was saying how he just loves being told that he's wrong. And the best venture capitalists love being told they're wrong, because it's really important to them that they're right. If they're wrong, they're going to lose loads of money. So having people stroke their ego isn't that helpful. So you should do the same thing. You should get people to challenge your beliefs. And that can come from two different things. Firstly, deliberately seeking out these influences, seeking out people who might disagree with you, and also making clear that you're the type of person who does listen to other opinions. If you are one of these people who comes across as really headstrong, and if someone tries to challenge you, you'll just shout them down, then you're not going to learn anything. So it's about seeking these influences out and then approaching things in the right way. And when you hear something contrary to your view, don't just write it off straight away. It's almost a reflex to go, oh no, that's rubbish because of this. Instead, be open to it. You're probably going to learn something and it might make you think better. Speak to people who are qualified on this subject. Speak to people who know more than you and listen to what they have to say.
It's a simple habit you can pick up, and it's something I try to implement now in meetings that I'm in. And I ask people, can you pick apart that point of view, or can you challenge that point of view? It's not because I'm nervous or insecure with my point of view. It's actually the opposite. It's because I believe in them strongly. I want an alternative point of view because I probably am not right. A younger version of myself would have believed I was right. But by learning and becoming aware of these things, you can realise what your flaws are. Self-awareness, which we've talked about time and time again, is massively important with this. Because if you're self-aware that you have some of these biases that we're talking about, then you can do things to fix them. And simple habits, just asking people to challenge something before you make a big decision. People you respect, people you want their opinions on, can make a big difference. So the next up, Rob, we've got recency bias.
Yeah, and conveniently, this is something that takes us back to our old friend, the 18-year property cycle. A large part of the reason that you have booms and you have crashes is that people love to follow. It's more comfortable to follow the herd. And people have very short memories. And recency bias is basically the same thing as saying having a short memory. If you were a completely rational, unbiased investor, then when making any decision, you'd think back to all the things that have happened before. You'd remember the previous boom. You'd remember the previous crash. You'd be looking at all the signs and the data. But instead, people are very much anchored to what's happening right now. So if there's just been a couple of really good years for property, then people will think that the next couple of years and every future year is going to be good for property. They immediately forget everything that's gone before. Now, it's emotionally easier to invest this way, but it's not that smart. You will make mistakes if you just assume that what's happening now will continue indefinitely into the future. And that's why you see phenomena like investors keeping on buying at the absolute height of the market just as the party is ending. If they were looking at the data and the facts and they were looking to history, they would not be buying at that point. And indeed, successful investors, which is what we're talking about today, will not be buying at that time. They will not be subject to recency bias. They will have eliminated that from their thinking, and they will know that this is the time to be sitting back and waiting and watching everyone else who's forgotten what's gone before, piling in at prices that make no sense, and we all know what comes just after that.
And those people get burned, and that's why recency bias is so dangerous. But also, it can cost you money as well in opportunity cost. Because after a crash, when things are going down, everyone exits the market because they think it's going to keep going down. 2009, fairly recent in history, so easy to look back at this, was a great time to invest. Property prices were low, and since then have kicked on. But before that, we had a crash. 2009 was not an active year for property investment, even though it was an exceptional time to invest, because the recency of the market was a downward trend and people were scared. So people exited and more people exited and people sold up their portfolios on the way down, which was absolutely the wrong thing to do. So people get burnt on the way up and miss opportunities when it's down. Recency bias is dangerous. So if you're finding it creeping into your mindset, you need to fix it.
You do. And this is something that we talk about a lot, but we talk about it a lot because it's important. Ignore what the media is telling you and ignore what your friends are telling you. The media is absolutely driven by recency bias. They are obsessed with what is happening right now. You almost never see stories that put things into a wider context or reflect back to how things were. They're always talking about today. And, that's the nature of what they do. That's fine. It has its place, but it doesn't help you make smart investments. The same goes for most of your friends. Whatever they're telling you is probably going to be wrong because chances are they are subject to recency bias just because most people are. You really must understand how cycles work. We talk about cycles all the time, and it's not because we think we've got some kind of magical ability to tell the future. It's because cycles work in a particular way because humans work in a particular way. And once you understand that, and you realize that if things are good right now, they won't be good forever. And if things are bad right now, they won't be bad forever. Then you will make far better decisions than you otherwise would.
So that's recency bias. Next, home bias. People love what they know. And understandably, home is where the heart is. I'm a home bod. I love it. Same coffee shops, same people, same routines. I'm really boring. You probably, for those who think I'm exciting, you're far wrong. Home bias is easy to slip into because it's comfortable. People stop looking elsewhere when it comes to investments because they love what they know and fear the unknown of looking outside of their immediate area to invest in. Now remember, when you do this, it kind of makes sense at the beginning because it's easy to get started. But if you keep repeating this model, you are putting all your eggs in one basket. You are hoping that your area is the best. And let's face it, If you were independently advising someone else and you realised all their wealth was tied up in one town or city, the fact it's all in property, you could argue, is a risk. Some people feel comfortable with that, I'm being one of them. But to then put it all into a single town and a certain property type even can be dangerous.
Yes, you can see home bias coming up in a couple of different ways. So the obvious one is sticking close to home, only investing in your hometown. But then home bias isn't just a location. It can be just using the same method over and over, sticking to exactly the same way, sticking to what you know. That's an example of home bias as well. Why is this an unhelpful bias? Well, there is a lot to be said for finding something that works and sticking to it. So we're not saying you need to go off and do something wildly different every single time, but you can hurt yourself by doing something that isn't actually working that well, but just doing it over and over again anyway, because it's what you know. It could also lead to you doing something that's worked in the past that doesn't really work anymore, but still you keep doing it because it's what you do. So if you've got a model that works really well, great, keep doing it for as long as it works. But then if it stops working, you should really be moving along. But home bias can prevent you from doing that. Also, it can prevent you from spotting opportunities elsewhere. If you're just staying in your lane so much that you've got the blinkers on and you never look around, you can miss really great opportunities. So if you happen to be living, for example, in an area where property investment used to make sense, doesn't really anymore, but you're sort of scratching around trying to find that one deal that you can just about make work, you might be missing the investments that you could make 50 miles away that would work infinitely better than the ones closer to home. So you can see how home bias can both get you into trouble and also prevent you from noticing lucrative opportunities. So what can you do about it?
Well, luckily it's a simple fix. After you becoming aware that you have it, and that's the key really, is awareness. But after the awareness has kicked in, start to look and invest elsewhere if you are heavy in one particular area. And a simple way of doing this is after each investment you make with your portfolio, just reassess your portfolio and look at the geographical spread and go, am I starting to become heavy in a particular area? Because even those people who think they're spreading their portfolios can fall into this because they have favourite towns and cities. So just doing a review, whether it's after every investment or an annual review, whichever you prefer, but just setting that and making sure that happens and having the awareness means that you can prevent home bias kicking in. And finally, our last one is greed. Yes, it sounds like it's for evil people, but it's not, because greed can be described in many different ways. Greed is the term that possibly makes people feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it's people who are chasing the quick wins. They want it now. They want the success now. They want the money now. And these people will believe in unrealistic promises because they want it to be true. So they hear a method or a strategy that can bring in quick, big wins that allows you to escape the rat race and do whatever else your goals are in a short space of time. And these people are gambling on big returns and switching off their common sense radar.
Yeah, and you can see so many examples of this, especially in the property world. I barely even need to say it. I'm sure you can already think of lots of examples of this. So the course that's promoting the new big thing, you can make lots of money, you can do it quickly, and it's easy. It's never the case that those three things are all true at the same time. It's just not. Yet still, you get courses that promise these big returns. People pay for them because they get greedy. They want to believe it. The same goes for investing in ventures with the promise of big returns. Greed can drive you to get involved in something that is really speculative and dangerous, where there could be a big return if everything goes absolutely perfectly, but there's also a high probability of losing everything. So people get involved in big, risky projects because they get blinded to the risk and the downside by the shiny, glimmering promise of big rewards. I think what you said a minute ago, Rob, is absolutely spot on. People get almost literally blinded to this stuff by those big returns. The greed kicks in and it shuts down your common sense.
Absolutely. And a bit of confirmation bias, which we talked about already, kicks in as well, because you start to create a story to tell yourself why this is possible and ignoring common sense principles. Now, you may be listening to this and go, well, I'll never do that. But it's human nature. It grabs our attention. These people know how to market and they know how to grab people's attention. So you may have the discipline to laugh it off after a 2-second distraction, but you can see why so many people go into these courses. And if you said to any of these people, right, take away all this, if I told you you could retire next year with no money in, but you just got to buy that £5,000 course, but in 12 months you could retire, would you advise any of your friends? It sounds like madness, but that's what people are doing. So it's really wrong. You've got to become aware again. But if you don't catch it, you can spend lots of money and be burned quite quickly, losing everything that you've got because you were chasing the big shiny object in a short space of time.
So how can you avoid falling into this trap? Well, the first way is just to be a bit cynical. And there's nothing wrong with being cynical on occasions. And really, it's just being sensible and acknowledge that property is not a get-rich-quick scheme. There are no get-rich-quick schemes in anything. If ever you're told that you can make a lot of money quickly with no particular skills or effort on your part, it is not true. You can, of course, make a lot of money quickly if you've got a fantastic idea, if you're really skilled, if you work unbelievably hard. But if anyone's telling you, this is just a cookie cutter model that you can follow, no, not going to happen. If you just accept that and you take that as read whenever you're going into anything, then that will steer you clear of some of these and it will stop your greed from kicking in. Another great thing to do before getting involved in any kind of investment or anything where you think, oh, am I getting a bit greedy here? Just sense check it with someone else. Get another person to look at it. If somebody else with a bit of distance looks at it and goes, you know what? That looks good. That makes sense. Then fine. But chances are, because they are a little bit more distant and they haven't got that greed nagging away at them, they'll probably be able to point out if it's not as good as you think it is. And that old saying will serve you well. People say it all the time, but they say it all the time because it's true and it's helpful. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
So like we said at the beginning of the show, really encourage you to pair this podcast up with episode 190 that we mentioned earlier. Go back and listen to that podcast. That's general mindset, and that will set you on the way. And then this specifically is aimed at investment. Now, what's incredible is most of this sounds like basic stuff, but I know that'll at least be one of those traits that you're at least mildly dipping into. So that's why this podcast is so important. So please share it around, let people know, because podcasts like this, although they are not directly about property, like Rob said, in a tactical way, these are the podcasts that can make a huge financial difference to your life.
Yeah, they can. And it's something that you need to be aware of and to work at constantly. You can't just listen to something and go, oh, yeah, confirmation bias, must watch out for that. It's something that you do have to work on constantly and make it into a habit, because these are natural human ways of thinking. Listening to one podcast once doesn't snap you out of that way of thinking forever. You might listen to it and you might think, yep, intellectually that makes sense. And you might even be able to think of an example of where you've tripped up in the past as a result of this. And that's great, but it is something you need to keep on working on. Always be working on your mindset. It is just as important as anything else you can do in property. And watch out for examples of other people's biases as well. Whenever someone's giving you information, they're probably biased in some way. Have you spotted the bias in this podcast? We've only talked about property. Is that home bias? It probably is. Most people would probably be telling you that property is part of a diversified portfolio. And we wouldn't disagree. We're just focusing on property because it's the property podcast, but it looks a lot like home bias. So always be watching out for that, and always be on the lookout for successful investors who you can model. See how they think. Talk to them, watch out for the patterns of thought that have helped them get where they are, and model those, because if you start to think like them, then chances are you'll start to get results like them too.
So coming up, we've got our resource of the week, and you very much want to follow on this podcast with this resource, and we'll let you know what's coming up next week. But before, an acknowledgement to these fine human beings, please. So I'll read out 2 quick reviews this week. First up's Mark, and Mark says, the podcast is simply fantastic. I've learned so much from Rob and Rob, and the way they break down various topics is excellent. Testament to their understanding of the industry. Truly masters of their craft. It gives me the tools and confidence to start my own property adventure. Thanks, and please keep going. We will. Thank you, Mark. And AGP says, thanks for the effort and sharing your knowledge, guys. Looking forward to getting into the rental property in the States. And this is a great help. Bit of international flavour to the reviews this week, Rob.
Yep, loving that. Thank you so much wherever you are for reviewing the podcast. And if you listen and you haven't reviewed, come on, shame on you. Just take a minute, give us those 5 stars if you think we deserve it. Leave us a few words and you'll hear them read out on the podcast in the future. Okay, so that's nearly us done for another week. Just time, though, for a resource of the week. And Rob, this one is a book that inspired this episode.
Yeah, so like most things we do, we've taken the content from elsewhere. Only joking. But this book had a huge impact on this episode. Recommend it, really do. Tony Robbins has published a couple of books now on money. The first one I purchased, but I was too intimidated to read because it was the size of a brick. He made your books look like a leaflet, Rob, which is saying something. And then his second book was a little bit more palatable, called Unshakable. And they are both his guides to financial success. They are basic lessons, but I think just like today's have been basic lessons, I think it's important just to digest them again, absorb them. I listened to this particular one via an audiobook, found it very easy, took some good stuff away from it, helped me reinforce some of the things I was already doing and made me aware of some things I possibly wasn't. So I highly recommend Unshakable by Tony Robbins. And I also highly recommend, Rob, that people join us next week.
Yeah, definitely. Join us next week where we're going to be talking about joint ventures. Really big topic in property. People talk about joint ventures a lot, but it's less often that you'll get a really detailed examination of the topic. What the different ways of structuring a joint venture are. What should you look out for? How do you find joint venture partners? All these things we're going to be talking about in our own little joint venture, the Property Podcast, next week.
I like it. Well, we've got that big joint venture, our mini joint venture, Ask Rob and Rob, back on Tuesday. But until Tuesday and next Thursday for the Property Podcast, thanks and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.